First of all, welcome everybody to EY San Francisco. This is EY's largest office on the West Coast. Sorry, I should say in the West region, so much from even east of Texas all the way through the West Coast. So largest revenue. We're not the largest in headcount, but we do have over 2,200 people based right here in San Francisco. You know, one of the things that I'm proud of here in the San Francisco office, we were just talking about it, that on any given Thursday especially, we'll have 700 people in this office, which is bumping up to capacity. We have a couple hundred interns this summer. They're running around. It's really fun to watch. But they should push us over 800, maybe even up to 900 people in this office. So we may be sold out on a couple of days, which is pretty exciting. We've also been in the city here, not in this office, thankfully, but we've been in the city for 75 years. Next year in 2025. So very excited to host you all here. I've been in my role as the leader of our office managing partner of EY San Francisco for 5 years. I joined the Bay Area Council back in 2019, December 2019, and have served on the executive committee since then. Thrilled to have done that. We're obviously all here today because of the great work that the Bay Area Council performs for our community. I'd first like to thank Jim Wunderman for his 2.5 decades of service to the Bay Area Council.
Just two.
It's just two?
Don't get ahead of some, but you never know.
Okay, all right, well thank you very much, Jim. Also to Christina Lawson, so much for being our fearless leader and chair. She has had some amazing contributions in a short time, so thank you very much, Christina. We're all working to improve the Bay Area for generations to come, and you can see it every day in the work that the Bay Area Council does. It's fitting, again, that we're here in the EY office because we were the lead sponsor of this survey, so I was happy that we could work out logistics to make this happen. DEI is among our core values, and we believe that a better working world is one in which we address income inequality and I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. That with these being our core values, we believe that a better working world is one that is fair to all people. We've helped fund this research initiative because we believe strongly in addressing the impact of inequalities and injustice and push for progress here at EY across all our offices. We have 90 across the country and across the globe. But also right here in our backyard. Thank you so much to Jim Belisario, or Jeff Belisario, there you are right there. Thank you very much to Jeff Belisario and Abby Royce. Abby, where are you? Yeah, Abby, back in the back there. The passion you put into this report, it really shows, and I can't wait to see the presentation today. So thank you very much. Now, I'd like to introduce April Atkins. Where is April?
Right here.
Oh, there you go. Okay. Come on up, April. April is a dedicated leader and advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion within the construction industry. Serving as E-Board trustee for Local 22, the Northern California Carpenters Union, April brings a wealth of experience and passion to her role. She's also the co-chair of FOCUS. I hadn't heard of FOCUS, but the Focused Outreach Committee Uniting Sisters. I love it. Where she champions initiatives that support and uplift women in construction trades. With over 30 years of experience, April's commitment to fostering an inclusive environment extends well beyond her work for the union. She also serves here at the Bay Area Council as co-chair of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. The council collaborates with community and business leaders to develop recommendations and best practices aimed at advancing racial and gender equity across the business community. Please join me in welcoming April, a true champion for diversity and inclusion in trades.
Thank you, Philip, and everyone for joining us today, both in person and virtually. As we gather here today, just after Juneteenth holiday, we're reminded of the importance of recognizing and addressing the inequalities that persist in our society. Juneteenth is a powerful reminder of the progress we've made and the work that still lies ahead in our journey towards true equity and inclusion. On behalf of the Bay Area Council DEI Committee, we are excited to present a critical discussion. The topic is not just a moral imperative, but also a key driver of economic growth and innovation in our region. I am pleased to be part of this event today and the dynamic panel discussion later on in the program. The report that this is being presented by today by the Bay Area Council Economic Institute provides crucial insights into how closing racial and gender gaps can lead to significant economic benefits and will be fundamental to work of the DEI committee going forward. I would like to introduce Jeff Belisaro, the Executive Director of the Bay Area Council Economic Institution, for more on that. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to be short and sweet. Thank you all for coming, and thank you to Philip for hosting and for sponsoring the report here. I know this has been a long work in progress over many years and like an entire pandemic. Now we're here, and this is meant to be the starting off point for a conversation. We're going to present a lot of charts and graphs, but this is supposed to get to solutions, and that's April's work on the committee, Suzanne working at the staff level on that DEI committee within the Bay Area Council. So we're going to kind of set the stage with the problem. We've got some solution ideas and recommendations both from the private sector and for government, but then this panel really then, I think, leads us into the next multiple years of work on this topic. We do a lot of economic impact studies at the Economic Institute. We've studied like baseball stadiums and healthcare expansions and new communities in Solano County just this morning, writing a report on that. And those are big numbers, right, for the economy, right? Those are millions, tens of millions. We're going to give you much bigger economic impacts here on what we can achieve economically in our region if we were to achieve racial equity. So we're going to look at income gaps, wage gaps, home ownership gaps. A lot of the charts you're going to see, you're going to look and say, can that be real? Is that right? Yes, it is. We worked for 5 years on this, so we double-checked it like 6 times. But the gaps that we're going to present also, and this is the frame of the report and the lens, right? Like this is a huge economic opportunity for the region. In addition to being a moral imperative, there's an economic drive behind all of this as well too. So I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to turn it over to Abby Royce. She is the lead author on this report. She's going to give you all the charts and graphs. She's our head nerd chart and graph maker. So Abby will take you through the slides and then lead the panel.
Thanks, Jeff. It's great to be here. My name is Abby Royce. I'm the research director at the Bay Area Council's Economic Institute. For those unfamiliar, we are sort of the research arm, think tank, economic public policy consulting firm of the larger Bay Area Council. Wear a lot of hats, do a lot of research across a lot of areas, but my background and specialty tends to be in housing research, specifically with sort of a racial equity focus. So this project was a really great for me, just given my interests and my background, and just because we really hadn't delved into this topic nearly as much as we should have as the council. So we're really excited to sort of get this going as sort of a topic area for the Institute. Sort of just an overview on this report, sort of the impetus of why we even studied this, why does it matter, why should you care, sort of the frame and goal of this research. So we found that sort of racial justice, racial equity, in academic circles, in public policy, in the media, is often sort of framed as from a deficit perspective. Like, what are we missing? What are we losing by not achieving equity? Rather than from an asset perspective, sort of, what could we gain should we achieve racial equity? So we've read a lot of studies on this, but nothing had really been focused on the Bay Area specifically, sort of quantify what we stand to gain in our region. So that was sort of why we set out to do this research. So our report is extremely comprehensive. Don't expect everyone to get through like all 50 pages, and I'm not going to cover it all here, but it's generally structured sort of like this. So, we make the case for why closing racial gaps should be an economic priority, right? And we chose to do so in 2 ways. There was a lot of things we could have studied, but we focused specifically on incomes and wages, and sort of the growth of wages for people of color should they, earn as much as sort of their white counterparts in the labor market, and then focusing on home ownership and sort of traditional wealth building, making it more accessible to people of color. And so we did this by putting like an actual dollar amount, like a hypothetical dollar amount on the wages gained by people of color if they, in similar earning brackets, educational attainment brackets, occupation, etc., if they, made the same as their, again, white counterparts in the labor market. So, try to adjust and control for as many, demographic and socioeconomic factors as possible. And so, I mean, we finished our report, as we often do at the Institute, with a sort of, okay, so now what? What do we actually do about this? You just gave me a bunch of charts and graphs that are, really stark and illustrate the issue, but what do we actually do next? And hopefully this panel will also, touch on a lot of those things. But how do we actually activate the public sector, the private sector, to bridge some of these divides? I mean, they're systemically embedded in our housing market and our other systems. And achieving this means doing something new, doing something that we've never done before. It requires new policies, it requires new investments, new strategies, and so I'm really just going to scratch the surface there, but that's sort of what we're hoping to achieve with this report. So to get started, this is like one of my favorite slides to show people. If you're interested in housing or the history of housing and the history of racial discrimination, you've probably seen something along these lines. There's a lot of ways in which the federal government, racially discriminated against people of color for decades. A lot of that came out of the New Deal by institutionalizing some of these sort of, discriminatory practices. And then, went on, even when those practices were sort of outlawed in the Fair Housing Act in the 60s, they still continued on in like private lending and other sort of, private forms. But to me, this is like a fascinating map. This is like digitized redlining from the Homeowners Loan Corporation in 1937. And so these maps essentially allowed financial institutions to deny loans to people of color for decades, regardless of their income, regardless of debt obligations, regardless of assets. Meanwhile, they were simultaneously, allowing white families to build, wealth and equity in the suburbs through subsidies from the FHA, among other, bolsters from the federal government. So, and some of those even had restrictive deeds, like prevented future resale to black families. I mean, these were not like, this is by design. This didn't just happen coincidentally, right? So I think this is a really cool map to show that this has been happening for a long time, and there are institutionalized ways in which we see things happen on the ground now. So what does this actually mean for the Bay Area now? It means that we've kind of disenfranchised our communities of color. I mean, poverty rates, incomes, these are all things that are disproportionately higher or lower for people of color. So for Hispanic and Latinx residents, they experience poverty at double the rate of white residents in the Bay Area. Black residents experience poverty at triple the rate. And on average, we also looked at areas of concentrated poverty. So we defined that as a neighborhood with a poverty rate of over 30%. When we looked at all these neighborhoods, they were comprised of around, on average, 80% people of color. Not a single concentrated area of poverty was majority white. They were all majority people of color. And then when we looked at home ownership, I mean, this also has major implications for housing and wealth building. White households are nearly twice as likely to own their homes than black households in the Bay Area. And again, this is by design. I showed you the redlining map. It was illegal to even get a foot in the door. And since 1990, that overall home ownership rate in the region has remained really flat. It's there's other things like wage growth, which we've seen increases, sometimes marginally, but at least they're growing. I mean, homeownership is one area where it has just not improved for decades at all, especially for Hispanic and Latinx and black folks, which actually the homeownership rates declined slightly over the last 30 years. So clearly not much has changed there. Again, something big needs to happen. We need to be doing something differently than the way we've been doing it before. So another thing we looked at is earning brackets for different racial and ethnic groups in the region, and where the pay gaps are actually the most stark. And something I thought that was really interesting about this chart is that for the lowest paid workers on the lowest end of the earning spectrum, wages are actually pretty comparable, right? I mean, there's some variation, but as you move up the earning spectrum, white earners just skyrocket above most earners of color. And I'd also like to add, there's a lot of variation in the AAPI, the Asian Pacific Islander community. That's something we dig into in the report itself, where we actually tried to break it down by specific Asian subgroup as much as possible when data allowed. So if you're interested in that, please read the report. But just don't have enough time to show every chart and graph that we made. But I just thought this was really interesting that the gaps get more pronounced the higher you move up the income spectrum. And then this is also one of the most fascinating things I think we studied. We took a look at mortgage applications, denials, approvals, pre-approvals. We looked at, it was an enormous amount of data, And we wanted to actually control for things like creditworthy metrics. So we wanted to look at income and debt and loan-to-value ratios and basically see, are people of color still denied at a higher rate than white borrowers when you control for all of these things? And we found that yes, marginally, but yes. But also we found that, they aren't even applying for mortgages at the same rate as white folks. So, of the 160,000 mortgage applications that we looked at, filed in the Bay Area from 2021 and 2022, only 14% came from Hispanic, Latinx, or Black applicants, despite comprising almost 30% of the adult population. So clearly, this speaks to, how do you actually get a foot in the door that you've historically been shut out of, right? It's not just about getting denied, it's about even getting started. How do you even know to apply for a mortgage that you probably could afford maybe, but you just don't even have the financial literacy yet to get that foot in the door. So that's something we thought was very interesting. All right, so Jeff, mentioned there are gonna be some big numbers. We do a lot of economic impact analyses, but this is a really big one. What would we actually gain in the region economically if people of color experience the same economic outcomes as far as wage growth goes as white people have historically? So we found that closing racial gaps in income would result in $55 billion added to the regional economy. Pretty big deal. And we modeled this methodology after a very sound national study, which found that the nation overall would gain around $2 trillion if they closed racial gaps in income. And I'm happy to get into the math with anyone who wants the nitty-gritty or is nerdy about data like I am. But I do want to say that this calculation is meant to be sort of a non-zero-sum look at the future. This is quantifying a somewhat hypothetical long-term vision for achieving racial equity and sort of speaking to underlying systemic institutionalized issues that have led to folks of color being in lower income positions in the first place. So we kind of use these findings to discuss barriers to opportunity and how we can sort of approach this from a long-term way. Obviously there's a lot of things that need to happen to even add higher wage jobs that we discussed in the report as well. Last data-heavy slide, and I'm sorry if I'm talking really fast, I just want to make sure we have enough time for the panel. But we also looked at the same data I just showed you, we looked at it on a per capita basis. So we looked at increases in per capita wages by race before the pandemic and in 2021, which is the most recent we could get at the time we did this research. And we found that per capita, the black wage gap is still the highest, which is pretty unsurprising given all the things I just told you. So employed black folks would earn $30,000 more per capita if they made the same as sort of their white counterparts, again, adjusting for age, occupation, educational attainment, et cetera, earning bracket. But the gap, the thing we found most interesting is that the gap widened the most. It actually decreased for black people over the course of the pandemic. But for Latinx and Hispanic folks, it increased more than any other group. So we kind of felt like the pandemic served as sort of a potent reminder of sort of the urgent need for some comprehensive policies that address some of these inequities. For the Hispanic Latinx population in our region, I mean, they were disproportionately put out of work and had to leave the labor force for a myriad of issues that you probably already know about. If you follow anything about unemployment and the stimulus checks, and a lot of the folks who are foreign-born couldn't qualify for stimulus checks or government aid, so that obviously impacts it as well. But we just thought that was kind of interesting that depending on what group you're in, it actually widened for some and narrowed for others. Okay, this is my last slide. Less about data, more about policy. So at the end of our report, like I said, we always try to add some sort of policy recommendations or considerations. We kind of split that into two main sections. We had some on public sector policy considerations and some on private sector considerations. So the first big one is just, pay transparency. So there's been a really growing movement towards pay transparency policies. SB 1162 was effective of January of last year, which we're really excited about because as a data person, I finally will have access to a lot of wage data by race and a lot of other demographic factors. It basically requires pay scales to be listed in job postings and requires private employers with over 100 employees to disclose median wages by a number of demographic metrics. So this is something that maybe Erica in our panel later on can speak to, because I know she's our representative from the state, but that's a pretty big deal. So more pay transparency can increase, equity outcomes. Another thing is improved access to mortgages. So there have been a lot of programs implemented around the region that provide things like down payment assistance for first-time home buyers, things like silent no interest second mortgages that get repaid when the home is sold. There's like home buyer and financial literacy programs that could definitely be bolstered more across the region. And then just encouraging other wealth building activities. So we focus specifically on housing and wages, but there are a lot of other ways that a person can gain wealth, right? There's things like education and entrepreneurship. So we didn't focus nearly as much on those in this report, but small business supports in underinvested communities, providing capital to real estate development, firms owned by people of color, things like that can make a big difference. And then finally, with the private sector considerations, we're not the first to say that, or discover or document that racial equity is like good for business. There's been numerous studies on this. You can look them up. That like greater diversity in a company is associated with increased sales revenue, more customers, greater market share. We found one study that found that organizations in the top quartile of diversity metrics are 33% more likely to outperform their peers in terms of profitability. So it's important to connect, diverse talent pipelines to support equity in education. So, we found in our report that white residents are over twice as likely to hold a bachelor's degree than Hispanic, Latinx, Black residents in the Bay Area. So there's a lot of efforts underway at individual companies to sort of connect to these diverse talent pipelines. So things like apprenticeship programs, which I'm sure April will speak to when we get started on the panel. Things like working with community colleges that ensure that like curricula are more aligned with the needs of the region's employers. Companies providing schools with programs that support students in the path to college. And then formalizing equity benchmarking. So this is kind of similar to pay auditing. To see how a company ranks against its peers, almost like a peer pressure situation, given that we have such a large number of major employers having some sort of racial equity index where you're actually scored or graded on metrics like hiring and promotions and philanthropy, et cetera. Workplace inclusion could spur more equitable corporate practices across the region. And then finally, this is something that we kind of thought was a creative idea. I don't know how doable it could be, but something like a philanthropic investment fund. There's so many businesses, especially now more than ever, engaged in DEI activities. So maybe better coordination to sort of bring those solutions to scale with some sort of centralized regional philanthropic fund. So this could allow for some sort of public-private partnership. Solve the issue, bring businesses and investment to some of these equity initiatives that a lot of people are kind of doing concurrently. So that's sort of all the high-level findings from this report. You can find it on our website, or you can reach out to me afterwards, and I'm happy to share it out with you. But we're very excited to release it. Like Jeff joked, we've been working on this for a long time, so we're really excited to have it out in the world. But thank you so much for listening to my spiel, and we'll get started on the panel. So I'll just introduce our panelists first. So I'll just start from the top. Kate Abrams is the Vice President of HR at PayPal. Kate wants to come up. April Atkins, who you've already acquainted yourselves with, is the Focus Committee co-chair at the Northern California Carpenters Union. Lisa Gaucher? Gaucher. I knew I was close. Is the SVP of Inclusion and Belonging at SVLG, the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, and the former mayor of East Palo Alto. And then we have Erica Gonzalez virtually, who is the Deputy Secretary of Equity and Strategic Initiatives, BCSH, at the state of California. Thank you all so much for joining me. It's very rare to have a panel of all women, so that's very cool. But I first just want to get started for a question for all of you, because I think DEI gets thrown around a lot, and some people might not even really know what that means, even people who are in the space. These terms like diversity, equity, inclusion, and now belonging is sort of added to that. It can mean different things to different people, especially depending on sort of the industry you're in and how that applies to the work you do. So could you maybe each speak to what you do and how DEI actually, what that means to you in the work you do in your industry? And maybe
this way. Sure. Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here today, and thank you for your comprehensive work on this really important topic. Just really quickly, at PayPal, we sort of consider DEI to both be, am I represented from sort of my demographic experience, but also am I included? So it's not just enough to be a number, but it's also, do I then get to have a voice at the table, and am I influential once I'm in my role? So that is what we strive to do every single day. I'm going to walk this over to you unless you have a...
I think
you do? Oh, okay.
Tiny.
So thank you so much for pulling this together. It is so good to see everyone, and it's good to be in cold San Francisco from the peninsula. So for the leadership group, and I wear a couple of hats. So I'm an elected official in the city of East Palo Alto. I serve as a senior vice president for the leadership group. And what does diversity, what does DEI mean for us? Really, how do you create fair and inclusive spaces for individuals? How do you make sure that people belong and they feel like they can bring themselves to the organization? I think that's what's important when we think about DEI.
Okay, being part of the NorCal Carpenters, as far as DEI, we trying to target women of color, so forth and so on. And we want and need to be included in the workforce as well as the males. Thank you.
Short and sweet. That's great. Very well said. And maybe take that back. This mic situation is funny. But maybe speaking to each of your backgrounds, what do you think some of the most effective policies in embedding some of the equity practices in your work have been? And you can speak to the biggest challenges or the most effective policies, or both, and sort of how those are at play.
I will riff off of the point you made earlier about pay equity. Obviously, there's been legislation across the country, at least in the United States, that has asked for employers to disclose pay ranges. What we have found is it really only takes a few, because what a company is then put in the position of doing is to make a decision. Do I want to disclose pay ranges only for those legislated areas? Or will we as a company embrace this globally? And we have found at least that most companies have embraced that globally. So I am heartened actually that it doesn't require sort of a quorum. It only requires one in a really strategic location to kind of kickstart that initiative across, just as an example.
Also, I just realized, Erica, I don't think we got to you left for the question.
Not very inclusive of us.
Sorry.
I'll combine my response for the two questions, if that's okay. I think within kind of in the government setting, in September of 2022, Governor Newsom issued an executive order really focused on equity and really kind of focusing on the government's role to advance equity and opportunity and really address disparities in both in access and in outcomes. And really the reason for that is because when you start to address unequal circumstances, it helps us all drive towards equal outcomes, right? So you're lifting up individuals, you're lifting up communities, and really give Californians a chance to thrive. In terms of some of the most effective policies, I shift the question a little bit to more kind of practices. I think because it's such a, for some folks, it is a difficult topic. And so really having a commitment from leadership. So it is a consistent message from leadership from all levels, from the governor, from Secretary Moss, from our department directors on really why this is important. Kind of a commitment to continuous learning, right? We're learning as we're going. We don't have all the answers, being thoughtful about that. How we use our data. What data do we have? What data are we missing? How do we really think about that? And some of it too is even kind of at a more ground level is around creating shared language and understanding. As you mentioned, DEI gets thrown around, but what does that mean? Are we talking about the same thing? And then really talking about how we prioritize the work, right? So this is not my catchphrase. I heard it somewhere, but it's really stuck with me. And it's we monitor what we measure. And so really being thoughtful about how we're embedding it in our policies, in our programs, and how we're holding ourselves accountable to that work as we move forward.
So for me, I would say that this work is, some of the policies, it has to start from the top. It can't be bottom up, it has to be top down. If not, it doesn't live within your organization. You're just talking about the work and you really can't get things done because it will stop at some point. So from leadership, it's important to make sure that it's coming from the top. Things that are going to be important, I agree with pay equity, making sure you're doing pay equity studies and individuals have that opportunity. And also when you're looking at a candidate pool, do you have a diverse candidate pool? Are you looking at everyone? to make sure that that everybody has an opportunity. Those are some of the things that are going to be important.
Okay, as a carpenter, the changes I've seen since I've been in the industry for over 30 years, being a carpenter, a laborer, and a waterproofer. The males are more receptive for the most part. Some of the changes that have been made, there's more women that own businesses, not only in construction or contractors, but as a whole. You have your Catherine Cahill from Cahill, you have Jean Bajort from Bajort Construction, and Nancy Bergerhall from Ironwood. And you have more females working as project engineers, superintendents, foremen, and it's more accepted to be transgender and women of color. They're, receiving more chances.
Yeah, do you want to add something?
Thank you so much. What I was going to add to, and I just lost my train of thought, and the work of making sure that we're being inclusive in the work that we're doing.
Yeah.
My goodness, why did I just lose my train of thought? Because it's the work that we do all the time but pathways to tech. So when you're thinking about hiring, oftentimes when we're hiring, we forget that we have a whole talent pipeline behind us. How do we look at that talent that's within an organization when it comes time for promotion? That's another policy, because oftentimes you forget those who have already been doing the work and who's already invested in the work. So that's one other thing I would add.
And actually, Lisa, why don't we continue with you, because I have some targeted questions for all of you as well. Something that you talked about when we spoke earlier this week was that people are sort of shying away from equity, and that we need to be maybe focusing more on inclusion and bridging that gap. Could you speak a little bit more to that and what that means and entails in your work?
Sure. So when you think about the inclusion part, we can talk about DEI and how we want to increase hiring, but if we don't make people feel like they belong and they're part of the community, we're creating a revolving door. Individuals are coming into our organizations, they don't see themselves in the organizations, they're not felt like they are included or like they belong, and they're leaving. So what does that mean for organizations? ERG, BRGs are often used within organizations to make sure people feel like they see themselves and that they can participate within the workforce. And that is something that we're leaning more into. How do you create or build on the ERG, BRG? So employee resource groups, business resource groups within organizations. It's important for inclusion.
Yeah, that's great. And that actually segues perfectly to a question I have for you, Kate, which is that PayPal has been recognized for its diversity efforts. It was named to Forbes list as the third best U.S. employer for diversity in 2024. So could you maybe discuss some of the specific practices or policies that have contributed to this, particularly in the realm of hiring and retention?
Yeah, thank you for that. And let me just say, I totally agree that ERGs are incredibly important. I'm so proud. We have 35% of our employee base who are active participants in our ERGs for this very reason. So we've actually institutionalized that as part of our global onboarding program to advertise those and make sure that people know how to get involved. Other things, I'll pull up a couple of different threads here together. I happen to have a role that supports our tech function, and you talked about non-traditional hiring. We absolutely invest in that. So we have adopted a belief that you don't necessarily have to have a classic computer sciences degree in order to be a technologist, but if we found that we can partner with other organizations that have cropped up throughout the community who identify really capable talent, and they do the training in a non-traditional way. And then we develop partnerships with them so that they become our talent funnel, rather than leaving people out to just say, gosh, I'm a number and can I apply through LinkedIn and does it go into a black box? That's number one. We also expand this idea of inclusion. So diverse hiring absolutely is important, and having diverse panels. But that same experience has to persist throughout their entire onboarding process. If you get into the door and then your first 30 days are spent meeting with nobody who looks like you or nobody who looks different from one another, that too sets a tone where people feel they have to be small. And so we're really intentional about having diverse candidate slates, diverse hiring panels, diverse onboarding plans, and making sure that we get them plugged into their ERG so they're seeing this sort of non-monolithic group of folks that they want to work with. I think the other thing to sort of draw on your expertise of data that has become really important is this idea of sort of the negative analysis. So to your point, when you want to promote somebody, leaders always want to have people who come up to their list and they have really good reasons for that. We are very intentional about running the negative analysis to say, okay, if this cohort of folks are up for promotion, let's look at the people who are maybe not on the list and overlay that in terms of tenure or similar years of experience. And so we intentionally prop up those names to say, we're not forcing you to make a promotion decision here, but we do want to pressure test that and just make sure that you're not overlooking somebody because they may not be, in the spotlight right now. And we have found all of those to be really effective. And I think one of the reasons they're effective is we embed those practices into processes that people are already responsible for. They don't become other. Hiring is not other when it comes to hiring diverse talent. You just have to hire. Promotion is not a separate process for diverse talent, it's just a promotion process. And so we are very, very intentional about embedding this very sort of specific moment of focus into existing processes, and we found that to be helpful.
So April, why don't we go next to you? You chair the union's Focus Committee, which stands for Focused Outreach Committee Uniting Sisters, which works to retain and recruit more women in the field of construction. What strategies have you found have been most successful in attracting women to this field, and how do you support their career growth once they join? This aspect of retention.
Okay, first of all, Focus has been around for about 3.5 years. And as far as mentorship, we have journey level female carpenters, even higher level apprentices that mentor our apprentices. And we have different, like every 3 months, we'll have a focus meeting, whether it's Central District, Northern or Southern District, that will have different, different meetings about how to do your finances, or harassment on the job site, or just what to do if you're being harassed or mistreated on the job site. As far as recruitment, we've had in the past 2 all-female cohorts, pre-apprentices, and they go to a 6-week, I believe, a 6-week, we have members from the training facility here, a 6-week pre-apprentice program. And about a week before they graduate, we have contractors come to the school, or they have contractors come to the school, and they interview the pre-apprentices, and they get to see how they work, and they ask them questions. And out of the 2 cohorts, 70% of the women got hired, and about 65% of them are still working. Also, we also at the training facilities, we offer skill build classes. And in the past, we've had welding, stair building, framing, doors and hardware. And to give them a level, to be to be at the same level as their male counterparts, to have the experience to perform the same work and earn the same money that these males are making. And that's one thing in the construction field, as far as carpenters. If a male makes a certain amount of money, that female is going to make the same amount of money. So there's no, separation in the wages. And as far as that, wages are paid the same amongst females and males.
That's great.
So, and sadly enough, nationally, the women, as far as in construction, as carpenters, is like at 3%. So, and that's bad, and with this DEI program, I hope that changes, makes a difference, that needs to make a difference. And contractors are being more receptive of hiring females. And that's the main part of what Focus does, is try to reach out to these contractors and get them to hire us, because we deserve the same chance as they do.
Not to mention, they're missing out on half of the labor force, right? When you're squeezed to hire more competent, skilled professionals, and you're it's 3% female, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a huge network of people to tap into and scale them up. So I think that's great what you're doing.
Also, as far as recruitment, we have Job Corps, in which I was an instructor for 2.5 years in Sacramento. That's a pre-apprentice also, in which you have direct entry. And here in San Francisco, you have City Build, and not only do they teach carpentry, but all different scopes of construction. And they have direct entry also. And as far as San Francisco, to be a City Build graduate and living in San Francisco, you have a better chance of maintaining a job because there's a certain percentage on every construction site. You have to have a San Francisco resident.
That's great, and it's great to have that perspective. And then I also want to bring it to Erica because it's kind of interesting to talk about what the state's role is in all of this and actually providing opportunities. So maybe you could speak a little bit more about making more opportunities available to communities of color, especially when given budget constraints or minimal resources to do so. So what do you think is and should be the state's role in some of these advocacy efforts and strategic efforts?
Sure. I think really the state's role is to kind of advance equity and opportunity and really be thoughtful about how we are addressing disparities, right? And so some of the ways to be able to do that and how you make kind of opportunities available is we need to have honest conversations and reflections about the barriers to accessing programs. If we have programs that are available, but they are not being made to communities, if communities are not accessing them, we have an issue, right? So looking at is it the outreach? Are we sharing resources broadly? Are we having meaningful engagement with communities? Are we being inclusive in how we share that information? Is it accessible? Is it in plain language so people can kind of understand it? How are we designing our programs, right? Are there ways to streamline the programs? We have government speak and lots of acronyms and very technical knowledge. And so when we think about programs, we design them in that way. And then community members are kind of like, I don't know what this means. How do I access it? Can you help me, pay my mortgage, right? And so thinking through how we make these programs more accessible and design and friendly with community members in mind. And then again, this kind of theme around continuous learning. What is it that we're doing right in the state? What can we learn from our other states? For the federal government or even local government has a lot of innovation in this space and different different programs. So really, how do we elevate that? How do we take it to scale? And how do we better partner with communities and industry to really make programs meaningful and to really be able to address disparities that we see, across the state?
And you mentioned some data transparency, which of course I have a self-serving interest in. But the pay equity data portal, which of course was enacted not that long ago. I mean, are there any preliminary insights on that, or is it still too soon to really analyze the data that you've been gathering from that?
We have some data. So as you mentioned, since 2021, the California Civil Rights Department has been collecting annual data from private employers. So it's for folks that have over 100 or more employees. So they're collecting information related to pay, job categories, race, ethnicity, and gender of California employees. And really kind of the goal of that is to encourage employers to self-assess pay disparities in the workforce and to promote voluntary compliance with equal pay and anti-discrimination laws. So according to some of the data from 2021, what we're seeing, and I think it was April that kind of touched on this, what we're seeing is really that women and communities of color remain concentrated among the state's lowest paid workers. And so, for instance, while there were fewer women, 48% in the workforce data overall, women made up the largest share of workers in the lowest pay range, earning $32,000 or less. And so about 54% of women in the data set were earning less than $32,000 in 2021. In addition, we're finding that fewer than 1 in 20 Latino workers and 1 in 10 Black and Native American workers were in the top earning positions. And so we're seeing a lot of disparities at the higher level. And I think your data that you showed earlier, tracks to that. And so annually, the department will be releasing the data. It is available on the website. And we'll see more data coming back. It does take a little bit to clean. You can imagine we're getting a lot of data across, many employers in California, but those are some of the preliminary inputs that we're seeing.
That's great, and then that corroborates a lot of the things. I mean, as the Economic Institute, we've been studying a lot of changes and trends and outcomes on, you know, how the pandemic has disproportionately affected marginalized communities, whether that's people of color, women specifically, or women of color. Women dropped out of the labor force at a much higher rate than men when the pandemic hit, unsurprisingly. I mean, they had to deal with childcare and like other things that just were no longer available to them. And a lot of them haven't returned at the same rate. So, I mean, I think I'm excited to deep dive into that portal because I think it might corroborate a lot of the, you know, more anecdotal findings that we've had at the Institute.
Abby, can I just share, and
Yeah,
you
please.
talk about those barriers?
Yeah.
Childcare, there's not enough childcare slots available. And when you think about the largest barrier, it's not having childcare, you know, and that impacts some men, but mostly women. So how do we create more of those opportunities? And if I could just share just a brief story, I know this is very short, but my journey, when I got divorced, I came back home. I started as a receptionist. I moved up to an executive assistant, and I moved to an executive assistant for a venture capital firm. Once that venture capital firm left, I worked for them for 9 years. When they left and went back to Boston, there were organizations who would not hire me because I did not have my bachelor's degree, even with the experience. And that's what some people are experiencing. So in 2018, I went back to school and earned my bachelor's degree in 2019 while serving as the mayor of East Palo Alto and working a full-time job. That is because there were programs that made it possible for me to take classes and get my degree while working, and it fit into my schedule.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have to fit into their schedule.
And, okay.
I want to piggyback off of what Lisa just mentioned about childcare. As a member of the Carpenters Union, we have what's called an ERICA grant, and it's for men and women that will fund the members for childcare. They will pay for the childcare. And as far as recruitment, I forgot to mention that we reach out to high schools, and we have 4 training centers, 3 in Morgan Hill, Pleasanton, Fresno, and Fairfield. Okay, and we have what's called career fairs, women in construction. So this last one we had, I think, over 200, Ayana? Over 200 women come out to Pleasanton. Oh, 300? Oh, she said 2, okay. Hundreds of women that come out, and we have contractors there. And some of them have been hired on the spot. This one particular female, what was her name? I went out to the school one day, and hi, Miss April. I'm like, hi. And I talked to a lot of people, so I remember her face. She said, I met you at one of the career fairs. And when I saw her the next time, she was in the pre-apprentice. And a contractor has picked her up, Albany's. She's working with Albany's right now, and they really like it. So we have different ways of recruiting women, and that's one of them. And as far as Lisa said, we do have what's called an ERICA grant that will pay for childcare for men and women.
Going to you, Kate, on the private sector side, I saw some sort of quote that was along the lines of like, you can't legislate attitudes. So business has, you know, the opportunity to make a really big difference when it comes to DEI initiatives. So could you maybe talk a little bit about, you know, like what an effective talent strategy actually looks like in incorporating DEI? You've already touched on it a little bit, but maybe even mentioned like touching on high attrition rates and how to deal with those.
I'm going to sort of deviate from your question,
Yes,
but
that's
I'll try to pull it together. I hypothesize, I don't know if this is true, but I hypothesize the sort of next evolution of this research, and maybe the discussion might be the interplay of what we've already spoken about, which is diversity and wage gap, but also the burgeoning return to office sort of narrative. I was talking with somebody earlier, and they sort of said, I think that COVID will be sort of that moment that is not unlike World War II or World War I, where it really changes the paradigm for how women engage with society. And I do wonder if some of the talent policies that companies have to grapple with is what is the trade-off between sort of a really rigid return to office and a more flexible one to accommodate things like this. accommodate childcare or accommodate elder care, which is, more, I think, equitable across gender lines. But that's going to be a really interesting, I think, evolution as we see that play out in the next couple of years. So that is just an example of a talent strategy that I think many companies are really having a forceful opinion on today. And I will just note, many companies who have already made that choice have maybe a more monolithic demographic at the top of the house. And so it'd be, again, interesting to see how that does or doesn't influence things in the flywheel.
Yeah, absolutely. Erica, do you want to comment at all in terms of the public sector perspective on that?
I think I agree with everything, right? Because we're thinking about it from, within the public sector, we have our workforce and workplace inclusion, right? And then you're also thinking through around policies and programs in terms of what outcomes are. And so thinking through how we use these programs and these conversations to move the work forward, and to the extent that we are an ability, in a position to model some of that behavior. But we definitely learn a lot from our private sector, from our partners, and from industry to figure out how we make the workforce more inclusive and more adaptable to the changes, and having a real honest reflection about how COVID has changed work, how COVID has changed communities, and how we build some of those flexibilities, but then how do we continue to be responsive to communities, be available, and being able, for folks to access resources is important.
So I think we started a little late, so I went a little bit over, but I'll just ask one final question for everyone to comment on, and then we can move on to the next part of the agenda. But sort of, what do you see as the future direction of DEI in your field? Are there emerging things or innovative practices that you're really excited about?
I personally am loving that we're kind of moving beyond the demographics, and we're moving more into this state of belonging. So do people feel authentic? Can they bring their whole selves to work? That implies an underlying sort of attitude, to use your earlier word, that I think is becoming far more the norm rather than the exception. I think the trick of this is going to be not, using policies to spur attitude change and to normalize a lot of this, so that people instinctively, instead of by compliance, adopt a lot of these best practices that we are talking about. We do see some green shoots, and that's really, really encouraging. But I think it is local, like it always. It can be very policy driven, but also can we localize it so that people do it without being told. That I think is the nirvana state.
Thank you, and I agree with the belonging piece, but I also think some of the emerging trends can be, how do we remove the paper ceiling for some of our opportunities? Oftentimes we want people to have these pedigree degrees, but they're people with skills. Can we look at skills as opposed to some of the other opportunities? So that will be it, removing the paper ceiling.
Once again, just trying to get these contractors to hire women, that would be very helpful and accepted, I was on the internet and I came up with something called WTUL, which stands for Women's Trade Union League, that was established in 1903. So I will leave this here so you can get they talk about the origins and what was done and how it was, they talk about how they organized to have women working instead of, what do you call that?
Homemaking?
Excuse me?
Homemaking?
That part, yes. Yes. And one of the things that is not being said now, I haven't heard it, but when I was starting my career as a carpenter in '95, I was told that women need to be barefoot, pregnant at home. So that has changed, and I just need to see more diversity and acceptance as women in this industry, not only carpentry, but all different trades of construction.
Let's end with you.
I agree with everyone. I'm sad to be the last person because I feel like the panel before me said everything so eloquently, but I would just say on the belonging piece, I think that will be what sustains the work. That will be what kind of gets embedded and institutionalized in the work within state government and within, and in different sectors and communities.
Thank you so much. Give a round of applause for an awesome panel. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you all. Next up is Jim Wunderman, CEO of the Bay Area Council.
thank you, Abby. We're a little behind, so I'd like to ask our panelists from Hanson Bridget to come up and maybe grab those chairs, and I'll sit here and you sit there. And I do want to thank Abby for the incredible work on the report. A round of applause for you. It took a really long time, but at the Barry Council, we're used to things taking a really long time. We celebrate projects we started 20 years ago, and it takes a while to, for really important things to happen. So I want to get into this, pretty swiftly. We have two terrific, and thank the panelists, by the way. You guys, hand to you. You guys did a really great job. And Lisa's not only a former mayor of Palo Alto, she is of East Palo Alto. She's the next, well, I'm not supposed to be political, but she's the next supervisor of San Mateo County. So that's a big deal. To have somebody of her standing and background and perspective, taking office as a county supervisor, that's really important. So this panel is called Doubling Down on DEI, and we've got two terrific panelists from the Hanson Bridget Law Firm. This is a law firm, for those of you, if you're not familiar with it, I see it as a really leading institution in the region for representing important governmental institutions and companies and issues. And Christina Lawson, who's the managing partner of the firm, is she took over that job, and we're very familiar with the firm. It's been very involved in the Bay Area Council, but it's done an amazing job. I've been observing her tremendous work, and she works really hard at it. The firm continues to expand and be successful. And Jennifer Martinez, I just read your resume, and if I read it now, we won't have time to ask you any questions, but she's the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at Hanson Bridget, which is, as you'll see, I don't have to describe it, as very serious and very engaged in this subject in a material way. So I think the panelists made the point of doing hands-on things to actually make it happen. And so I think Hanson Bridget is a really great example of a firm that's doing exactly that. And finally, just want to thank EY for hosting this and leading the report. Thank you for your leadership, Philip. So you wrote an op-ed on DEI, and you said that programs are often misunderstood. And so explain that a little bit. What are some of the most common misconceptions about DEI, and how could we sort of dispel the rumors and sort of set the facts straight? Maybe I'll start, Jennifer. We'll go to
Sure. So I think the biggest misconception probably is that they're entitlement programs, or that they involve lowering standards, right? Or at its worst, kind of these education camps meant to make straight people or white people or men feel guilty or something like that. And DEI programs are none of those things, right? Quotas have been illegal under federal and state law for decades now. And so I think that's, to me, is the biggest myth, that there's merit and diversity are somehow opposite sides in the business world. And dispelling those myths, I think, is the really difficult part, right? As a lawyer, last couple of years, seeing Ketanji Brown Jackson, for example, being nominated to the Supreme Court, and literally the most qualified Supreme Court justice we've ever had. And all anyone could talk about was that she was somehow selected because of her race and her gender, right? And so I don't, dispelling that inclination for people to make those assumptions is not going to be an easy task. We can certainly implement DEI initiatives and show results and show how those make our firm more successful, but dispelling that base assumption is a task of a higher order.
Yeah, I guess to to amplify what Jennifer's saying, and also talk a little bit about our op-ed that we did back in January, which was really a reaction to a number of billionaire businessmen on social media and activist lawyers, taking issue with law firms, suing law firms for their DEI programs, right? Because, and a person who said publicly that he doesn't really care whether or not the legal profession has a place for everyone. Well, we do, right? And we've been really invested in this work for 65 years, starting off because lawyers of different religious backgrounds weren't really allowed, or it wasn't permissible to practice together. And a group of guys, about 65 years ago, got together over at the Palace Hotel. I mean, I guess infamously, maybe it's real, maybe it's not, it's Hanson Bridget lore. But a group of guys of different religious backgrounds got together and said, hey, we're just gonna do this differently. And it's been really inculcated into our culture that we just do this differently, right? It is about belonging. But I mean, to talk about how to dispel this myth. I mean, Hanson Bridget has never had a quota for how many people we're gonna have. We've never even established targets, right? And we've still had great success, frankly, because we've got Jennifer Martinez, and she really is a superpower in the legal industry. She gets asked to speak all over the country on these topics, but it's because we've created this environment. And look, we're not perfect. I'm the first female managing partner of the firm after 60 plus years of being at it and having been in those roles. But we're trying to make advancements, and look, it's widely misunderstood. And I'm really, really deeply worried about the narrative on social media right now that DEI programs, somehow need to be eliminated. I've been worried about op-eds in the Wall Street Journal. That's why we went out publicly in the legal press with our op-ed doubling down on DEI. So I am deeply worried about people misunderstanding what these programs are really about. And for us, they're really about caring about our people, caring about our communities, caring about the potential and opportunity and creating that for everyone. They're not numbers-based at all, although we look at the data and we make sure we're moving in the right direction. But we need to get back to reminding everybody that it's not about this acronym DEI. It's about caring about other human beings and caring about our communities.
Thank you very much. And I'll remind that it was, close to 2 decades ago that I got a call from Jackie Spear, who had left the California State Senate and wasn't in Congress yet. And she'll be your partner on the Board of Supervisors. And then, she called me and said, you really should get involved with the Hanson Bridget law firm. And I said, I think they're already a member. She said, no, you really have to see what this firm is about. And she talked about that. And so we met, and the relationship between BAC and Hanson Bridget's been amazing. And you're not only their chair and managing partner, you're our chair. And it's really astounding, I think, what you've done, how different you really are. One of the points we've been trying to make all these years on DEI is that there's a competitive benefit, not a downside, but a benefit to actually engaging and investing in DEI. Can you talk about that from a competitive standpoint?
Yeah. So I think the big advantage, right, is bringing to bear different viewpoints, different experiences to tackle the same problem. Gets more success, right? Leads to more innovation. It means people can better recognize a problem as such, have a wider variety of solutions to offer. Anytime a workplace or a decision-making body is too homogenous, you're increasing the number of blind spots. You're increasing the hive mind aspect and kind of tamping down on people wanting to be different, suggesting something different, even though that different suggestion might be what breaks a logjam. Whenever I speak on this topic, I like to tell, I'm a trial lawyer, so I like to tell stories generally, but one of the first jury trials I had was up in Yolo County, and it was a disability case. And I was the second chair on the defense team, and the first chair was one of my mentors, a man. And the disability at issue was a back disability. It was a female plaintiff with a back disability. When she testified, she walked up to the stand in 5-inch heels. I mean, it was crazy, right? And I notice my eyes go right there, and my male partner didn't even notice at all. Proceeds to question her. She started at the end of the day, so her testimony ended. First thing I say to him afterwards, like, she wears those heels tomorrow, say something. And sure enough, she wears the heels the next day, and he makes a comment about it. Like, plays it up in front of the jury, and it was just this brilliant moment of taking this plaintiff down, right? Chipping away at her case. And he wouldn't have noticed that. But the fact that we had a diverse team at council table meant I was bringing to bear a different viewpoint, different experience, and could tell him, every woman on that jury, when you point out, 5-inch heels are not compatible with a back disability is going to get it on an intuitive level.
I mean, Jennifer nailed it with that point, right? And I mean, you might say, well, why does the law firm care so much about these issues? I mean, obviously these fundamental issues of justice for all, right? But you know, the reason we all went to law school in the first place. But it's more than that. It's because it matters in our clients and in our work so much. To the point you just made. Whether it's a jury, whether it's government agencies, and interestingly, we've got a meeting later this afternoon because we're working on a project that came out of actually the NCC meeting, that the New California Coalition meeting that I attended a couple months back. There's been a really terrific groundswell of new representation in the Latino community in state government, and because we're so connected at Hanson Bridget through our client work and through our community work in the government here in California, we're going to take a look at how to increase that representation both at our own firm to make sure that we have people serving in legal positions and other positions in local, regional, state government, and just creating this new opportunity. But that's because, I mean, if I think about it from our business perspective, right? So it's the right thing to do for sure. If I think about what's good for our business, reflecting and understanding both the personality and diversity of California is what's going to sustain our business over the long term, right? And California is not getting whiter, right? The representation is increasing at all levels of government. There are going to be these huge voting blocks that we haven't been traditionally used to, and so again, it's good for business because it's what California is all about. And look, California hasn't always gotten it right. You saw that redlining data, and I grew up as a real estate lawyer, and so you see that in deeds. And when you see something like that in a deed, and you are doing client work, it's really almost remarkable to think that here in California, that we had those segregationist policies in place. But being able to do something about this is part of California's ethos, right? So sure, it's a business responsibility, sure, it's the responsibility of the legal industry, but it's about reflecting back, us reflecting back to the community what the community is.
Yeah, I love that chart. And just to start, my wife works she's a psychologist and works at the Market Hall in Oakland, and I think anyone would think of Rockridge as being a place that would champion diversity, but that whole neighborhood was built and offered to people on the basis that the only people who could live there would be white. And so I think it's still somewhere in the codes in there. You mentioned, Christina, you mentioned the climate that we're in which over the last year, maybe it's more now, we've got all of this really harsh comments, negative, real heavy political pressure coming on companies to sort of withdraw, retreat from DEI programs and so forth. What do you think, and that's what, in part, why I thought it was really timely for us to, promote the study and hold this event, because it gives a chance for an organization like ours to say something and do something about this and kind of keep it on the front burner. What do you think lays ahead now for DEI given this? What do we need to do to challenge the misconceptions and make sure that that we're being heard on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need more people speaking out, right? I mean, the op-ed or the genesis of the op-ed we wrote, and we'd be happy to share with all of you. I think it was included in some of the agenda and materials that went out. But I mean, it really was me watching, some very well-known figures on Twitter or whatever this company is now, X, really lambast these efforts and talk about how they're discriminatory and just put out a tremendous amount of misinformation about what DEI really is. And I mean, it's never a good thing when I send a text to Jennifer and I'm like, we have got to say something, right? But we've got to say something when that sort of thing happens. And I mean, interestingly, Philip, we were talking earlier today about, I have, being the chief executive and the managing partner of the firm, a little bit more free reign to say, hey, we're going to say something about this and we're going to act, right? And I've got a good understanding of what my board will think about us doing that sort of thing. a lot of companies are much more worried about that, right? They're worried about engaging in this very polarizing conversation, not because it should be a polarizing conversation, it actually shouldn't be, right? It should be exactly the opposite of that, but they're worried about engaging in that conversation because they don't want to be part of that narrative, right? They view it as too political. We've had a lot of conversations over many years about whether this is political, right? That when we engage in this conversation, and we need more of us really refocusing on the caring piece of this, the caring about our people. I mean, to say that DEI is discriminatory, it couldn't be more incorrect, right? I mean, the whole point is about inclusivity, belonging, having everybody at the table, giving opportunity and possibility, and realizing the potential of our people. So if we can refocus the conversation there rather than just on the letters that we've used in, again, corporations and companies like Hanson Bridget, right? We get fixated on, okay, let's say it's DEI now or whatever. Like, let's get away from that language, if that language itself is polarizing, and have this broader conversation that it's really about our people, it's really about our communities, and again, it's really about potential.
I was going to say, I think that one of the ways that I try to approach it when I work with clients on building their own DEI programs is breaking it down from this kind of big, scary monster, and do I have to talk about race? Do I have to talk about sexism? And you don't have to do any of that, right? So I love to tell the story of when the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed. One of the most hotly debated aspects of the law was the mandate to put curb cuts and ramps into public streets, right? This was, someone said, a problem. We're focusing on an underrepresented group, people with disabilities, and here's a solution for that group. Well, what happened after the law was passed and these curb cuts were created? Everyone loved it, right? Parents with strollers loved it. Delivery people loved it. And so everyone ended up benefiting, even though we were focused on making a more equitable life experience for a particular group. That's all that DEI is, right? We're not creating a quota. There's no kind of lowering of standards. We're simply saying, first of all, recognizing a problem as such, right? Not seeing the lack of diversity and assuming that means people who from underrepresented backgrounds don't have the merit to advance, but saying, could there be something wrong with our process? And just starting with that simple question and some thoughtfulness, some intentionality about looking at your programs and practices. I try to sell clients on that's all that DEI is. And what do you know, when you make the process more equitable for everyone, diversity does increase.
Thank you. And it's a really good point that it's for all of us. It's sort of the whole point of the study was to show that the DEI has a benefit for the entire society, especially for the subgroups who are impacted, but collectively for all of us. So we're sort of getting short on time here. So the future of this question probably won't be up to us. It'll be up to the younger folks. And so what advice would you give to young people? I know my own kids that maybe were from the Bay Area that don't seem to have much trouble with this on the natural, so maybe there's a cultural shift, or maybe there's not. What is the advice you would give to young folks as to how they can be impactful in this space?
Yeah, by the way, the kids are going to save us, right? I mean, in this space, because they've got this figured out. They think that, anyone in my generation and above, doesn't get it, has it all wrong. These are not going to be issues. Because, by the way, the younger generation, and I have a 19-year-old daughter, she's my oldest, but they're going to demand these things of us, right? They want to work in places that are purpose-driven and values-based. They want to work with people and experience their life in broad communities, right? And I've been thinking a lot about this recently, and there was an article I forwarded, I think, to Jim yesterday and others, just about needing to create collaborative community organizations. And in part, this is because the faith-based organizations of the past are not serving as those convening spaces, right, for collaborative conversations. And how do we create these new opportunities for engagement and gathering and getting together, and not just on the work basis, but in the social context as well. And that's because people are naturally drawn to other people, right? They want experiences with others. They want, that value alignment. I think, like I said, they're going to save us from ourselves. They're not interested in having this conversation about whether it's too woke or companies should fire all their DEI professionals. They want to know what our companies are all about. They want to know that we're advancing their values, and so they're going to demand it of us whether we like it or not, right?
Yeah.
My advice for young professionals, whether it's DEI professionals or anyone working towards these goals, is something that often got me in trouble when I was younger, but have a big mouth, right? And don't be afraid to use it, and follow that up with, there's a Spanish word that doesn't quite translate, but ganas, right? Some moxie, some boldness, some daring, and I think that we can't let fear be the driver for it. Christina mentioned these activists, right, that are using the courts to challenge DEI, and they really are instilling fear and hoping that we all, out of fear, pull back from DEI. They want the fear to do the work. And we shouldn't let that, right? We've heard today about how DEI is not just the right thing to do, but is good for business. And why should we ever be afraid of not only something that's good for business, but also the right thing to do, right? So aspiring DEI professionals or leaders in general should be bold and big-mouthed on these issues. We need a chorus of proponents that's going to drown out the people that are trying to drive us by fear.
I think in Yiddish they call it chutzpah.
There you go. There you go.
Translation, Abby, right? So, look, you mentioned NCC before, so we didn't call it New California Coalition for nothing. The idea is to really reinstate that core value back into our state, and realize, as we progress complex public policy and social policy, it's got to benefit everyone. It's got to include everyone in an honest way. That's sort of the core basis for creating an organization to move California forward and give all people, the opportunity to participate in this incredible economy that we have. We have, the extreme, mentioned billionaires a few times. Maybe that's okay to be a billionaire, but then everybody should get a chance to do that once in a while, right? So I'm with you as chair, Christina, I think it'll be part of your legacy, and the merger that we're going through with SVLG, which has really provided a lot of leadership. And again, Lisa, thank you for participating today. I hope we can double down in the spirit of this conversation on how we move this forward and be more creative and be more aggressive and have a little more chutzpah about it. And Abby, thank you again for doing the study. And EY, when you get an email from Philip, it's a short email with a very long explanation of EY's commitment to DEI, right? And that says a lot. And I always look at it. I say, this company is making a point here, and it's a point that needs to be made, and I think it's a point we all need to make. So it's not easy. Love what the Carpenters are doing. Really, the organization has really shown itself, to be quite amazing. PayPal, the state of California, we really have, I think, a good group of folks working on this, and let's all come together and just do more and do better and show that California is a leader and that we're not going to get pushed back, we're going to push forward.